Hi, I'm Erin. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about something that's a little bit different. I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this online, but I would like to share some of the books that I have found to be thought-provoking, compelling, or helpful as I have been deconstructing my own faith tradition. So for a little bit of backstory, I was raised in a home with two Christian parents. My parents were very balanced. They didn't lean super liberal or super conservative. They really were very realistic about a lot of things, and I really appreciate that because it gave me a safe place at home where I could grow and learn and ask questions. But I did end up spending about 10 years in a very high control religious environment outside my home, and that lasted until a couple of years after college, at which point I really started to deconstruct from that whole religious system. So for about 10 years now, I've been really deconstructing. I've been healing from some spiritual abuse and some religious trauma, and have also just been deconstructing what it is that I actually believe. And I've come to change some beliefs. I've shifted largely in a lot of things that I hold to now. I've learned to be okay with not having answers for everything, and come to hold conclusions about things very loosely and just be a lot more open-minded about things. And that has been very good for me. Now, I know all of us come from a different place when we are deconstructing, and that it's a very difficult path to walk. For some of us, and including myself, it means losing a lot of, if not all of your community. I haven't lost my family or anything, but some people do. And so it can be a very painful and lonely journey. And sometimes it can feel like you're the only one asking these questions. You're the only one learning to see things a little bit differently, or exploring different interpretations of things and ideas, and learning about the truth about history and all of that. And whilst people on social media who are also going through that can really help us to become aware that we're not the only ones on that path, when you first start, you might not be aware of all the other people who are doing the same thing, and it can feel really lonely. And so I just want to share some resources that I've found helpful as I've been deconstructing, particularly since 2020. I've really hit the peak of my deconstruction period, and my beliefs today look a lot different than they used to, but I'm in a really good place. So I just want to share some of the things that have been helpful for me. The first two books I want to share are books that I think would be helpful for people who are just in the beginning of their deconstruction process, that can help them maybe reimagine what faith could look like, maybe outside of a high control religious environment, or in a kind of church that maybe isn't a spiritually abusive one, or one that's covering up abuse, etc. Or that could just help you realize that you're not alone in this process. So the first book is called A Church Called Tove by Scott McKnight. His writings I have really come to enjoy over the past few years. He has really thoughtful perspectives on things, and he really advocates for a church culture, if there's going to be one, that is not abusive, that is not controlling, and that focuses more on the core values of loving God and loving one another, and making sure that our churches are safe places for everyone. This is a book I think a lot of people could really enjoy. Then this is a book called I Guess I Haven't Learned That Yet, Discovering New Ways of Living When the Old Ways Stop Working by Shauna Niequist. This book reads a little bit like letters to a pen pal, or to a little sister who's moved away. It feels a little bit like Shauna's writing you letters as you're reading, and they're kind of spread out over time. What I really appreciated about this book is that I read it at a time when I was questioning everything, feeling very much alone, and feeling like as I was letting go of toxic theology, I was losing parts of myself, and I didn't know if any of my faith was going to survive the process. And that was a very scary, somewhat dark season for me, because I went through a period of feeling like I didn't think I believed any of it anymore, and I didn't know of anyone else who had been in that place and come out the other side with anything resembling an intact faith. And I read this book, and there's a section in here when the author kind of talks about how she came out the other side, and it helped me realize there were people who came out the other side of a deconstruction process and still believed in something. And that was really helpful for me. I know some people walk through deconstruction and they end up walking away completely and letting go of everything they've believed in, and just very much, I guess you would call it deconverting. But this book showed me that that's not the process for everyone. A lot of people end up really just stripping everything down to the foundation, and maybe everything was burnt down and you're sitting in ashes, but there's a little sprout. And for me, my faith has been something like a phoenix, where when everything was gone, it still rose from the ashes, but it looks a lot different now than it used to. And that has been very good for me. And this book really helped me to feel hopeful, I guess. So it's one that's not necessarily just about deconstruction, but it's one that I really enjoyed reading in a part of my deconstruction season when I was feeling a little bit lost, I would say. Then there's a group of books that has really helped me to explore different ideas about the concept of God and a decolonized faith. These books are all written by someone called Dr. Randy Woodley, who is of Cherokee descent, and he and his wife steward a piece of land in Oregon called the Aloha Indigenous Center for Earth Justice and Aloha Farm and Seeds. And I started reading this book first, which is Indigenous Theology and the Western Worldview, a Decolonized Approach to Christian Doctrine. And I really enjoyed this book. I felt that a lot of the values that he described in this book aligned with mine, and it just really resonated with me. It was something that expanded my way of thinking and helped me to kind of tune in a little more to where my spirit really was residing in terms of where my values are, and I really enjoyed this book. I also really liked Decolonizing Evangelicalism, an 11:59 p.m. conversation by Randy Woodley and Bo Sanders. This is a conversation written back and forth between Randy and someone else. It's very thought-provoking, and I found a lot of value in this book. And then the third one is Becoming Rooted, 100 Days of Reconnecting with Sacred Earth. I really loved this book. It's so sweet. It's so beautifully written, and each entry is pretty short, just a page or two, so you could treat it as kind of just like a 100-day meditation practice or devotional book and read a little bit here and there. I liked to read this one outside in the spring and the summer. It was a book that really resonated with me. Along that same vein of kind of decolonizing faith are two books that I've started reading but haven't finished yet. So full disclaimer, I haven't read them all the way through. But what I have read has been very good, and I've heard really good things about them. So this one is called Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys, a Native American Expression of the Jesus Way by Richard Twiss. Richard Twiss was the founder of Wakonee International, a Sikangu Lakota. He was a co-founder of the North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies and a co-founder of Evangelicals for Justice. He earned a doctorate in missiology from Asbury and was the author of One Church, Many Tribes. He has since passed away. This book is written in a little more dense of a writing style, but what I've read so far has been very good, and it kind of goes along with what Dr. Woodley talks about in his books. And then by Kristen Kobes DeMay, Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. This one kind of looks more at recent American history and how Christianity has really become tied to politics and other elements of culture that aren't necessarily in line with the values Jesus taught and modeled. So this is also one that I haven't finished yet, but what I've read has been very compelling. and it's been very interesting. And for other people who have felt very disillusioned with modern Western Christianity, specifically since 2016, I think you'll find that book to be a very illuminating read. Then I have a little stack of books that have really helped me to kind of explore different interpretations of things, different ideas about the concept of God, and different doctrines that I was taught when I was particularly involved with high control religious environments. And I've talked about one of these before. It's Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God by Brian Zond. A lot of us, as we're walking through the deconstruction process, end up asking a lot of really difficult questions, and the surface level, trite, kind of shallow answers we're used to hearing just aren't satisfactory when you're really honestly digging deep and asking those questions. Brian Zond in this book digs deep, asks those questions, and presents alternative interpretations that I find very compelling. I gave this book 5 stars and immediately recommended it to other people. My husband's already read it and he also really liked it. I just can't recommend this book enough. I think that if you're in that place right now where you're asking questions, you're examining some of the places, you're examining some of the things that maybe you're having a hard time reconciling or are experiencing some cognitive dissonance with, you might find this book really helpful. And the next book that goes along really well with that one and the next one is called Love Wins by Rob Bell, a book about heaven, hell, and the fate of every person who ever lived. This book is interesting because it explores the concepts of heaven and hell and then explores different ways people have interpreted those concepts and texts about those concepts throughout history, and just presents some alternative ideas and positions that you might find appealing if you are kind of in a process of reframing what you think or examining what you think about those things. So I found this to be a very thought-provoking and compelling book, and I really liked some of the positions he presented in this. Then the last book that I think goes really well with those other two is called Original Blessing, Putting Sin in Its Rightful Place by Daniel Schroyer. There are different interpretations about the idea of or doctrine of original sin in Christian circles, and a lot of them, the predominant ones particularly, are fairly new doctrines. They haven't existed all that long. The interpretations they are attached to have not been around all that long. And this book kind of presents some different ideas. And I thought it was very interesting. It's a book that I will be thinking about for a very long time. And it's one that I definitely want to go back and reread again in 2024. I read it a couple months ago, and as soon as I finished it, I wanted to pick it up again and read it, but I haven't done it yet. I wanted to get through the rest of my reading list for this year and then maybe go back to this one next year. But it's another one that I read through my library and ended up buying a physical copy because I thought it was just so good. It kind of, something that I really like in this is that she offers a handful of different interpretations of Eve passages that have existed in different parts of the world throughout history, and some of them are really interesting. So if you're kind of exploring different ideas that are still in line with Christianities throughout history, you might really enjoy this. This one is one that I have just recently finished and again went out and bought my own copy because it was so good and it resonated so much and was so relevant to my own personal experience in high control religion. But it's called When Religion Hurts You by Dr. Laura Anderson, Healing from Religious Trauma and the Impact of High Control Religion. I think this book would be very helpful for anyone who is in a deconstruction process, is recovering from spiritual abuse or religious trauma, or has been part of a high control religious environment and it has stepped away from that and is learning to find language to describe what happened to them and what they've gone through, and learning how to find safety in their body again The author of this book is a therapist. She's a doctorate level licensed family therapist, a trauma-informed psychotherapist, founder of the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, and co-founder of the Religious Trauma Institute. And this book was so good. I gave it 5 stars. The way she described her experience and the experience of some of her clients in this book was sometimes word for word the way I have described my own experience. So I found it personally very helpful, and it's one I would definitely recommend for other people who are in a recovery process. The last stack of books that I have all fall under the category of women's studies and the intersectionality between that and interpretation of sacred texts, church history, how the Bible and interpretations of the Bible have been used to oppress women throughout history within faith circles. And the books that I have found to be educational, freeing, uplifting, life-giving, and very helpful as someone who spent time in a very spiritually abusive, high-control religious environment. So the first books, let me just pull these out here. The first book that I would recommend reading if you're interested in this area of study is The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr, How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth. She really examines some of the ideas about what Christians teach in modern Western Christianity specifically, about women's roles and gender roles in church environments, and how maybe some of the interpretations that we have held to within our modern circles might not be so accurate. And she looks at history, well-documented history, and it's a very well-researched and thoroughly well-presented book. It's a very good introduction into this topic if you're wanting to study it or want to recommend it to someone. And it's written in a very friendly, easy to read tone. I really enjoyed it. After reading Beth's book, I would recommend reading Lucy Peppiatt's books. She's written several. A couple that I have enjoyed are Unveiling Paul's Women and Rediscovering Scripture's Vision for Women, Fresh Perspectives on Disputed Texts. This one really, it's a very short book. It's very easy to read, and it really dives into the 1 Corinthians 11 passage and interpretations of that, and historical context and word studies. It's very thoroughly researched, it's very well done, and I think is very solid. It's the most compelling interpretation of 1 Corinthians 11 that I have ever heard. It's the most logical one that makes the most sense to me. There are others that are also compelling, but I found this to just be so inspiring and so life-giving, and it's one that I would highly recommend. And then after you've read that, I would also recommend reading this one that dives into other texts aside from just the Corinthians texts. So this one goes into Ephesians, Colossians, 1 Peter, and 1 Timothy passages about women as well, and historical context, word studies, and various interpretations that have existed throughout history before our modern interpretations really took hold. I think this book would be very helpful both for women and for pastors and church leaders who are male and people who have women in their lives that they love. So that's a very good one. Then there's a book that's very popular. It's called Half the Church by Carolyn Custis James. This is one that I think I only gave 3 stars to, just because I felt like I had read other books that had done what she had done better, and I felt like some of the points she tried to make in here were a little bit weak. But there were also a couple of things in this book that I found to be really interesting, particularly like her study on the word Ezer and what that really means, and Hayil and what that word means. So some of the places in this book where she goes into the Hebrew words used in the Old Testament that are now used to kind of subjugate and oppress women, how they weren't used that way contextually in the Old Testament and meant something different than we often think they do in modern Western Christian circles now. And so there are definitely some things of value in this book that I think could be helpful for some people, but I wouldn't recommend this as a first book that you read, and I wouldn't recommend it as the only book you read. I think it could actually do more harm than good if people were trying to use this to defend their position on gender equality in church circles, just because I don't think she dives deep enough. But there are some interesting things in here that I found interesting and that I think other people could too. Then there are a few books that still fall under this category, but they're less study books and a little more experiential. The first is Women Rising by Megan Chance, Learning to Listen, Reclaiming Our Voice. This reads a little bit more like a memoir of a woman who is a Christian and who's been involved in missions work, but has really come to a place of reckoning with her role in all of that and learned how to really uplift women. Megan now has a podcast, I believe. I can't remember the name of it right now. Oh, Faith and Feminism podcast. If you're interested in the intersectionality between faith and feminism, I think you'll enjoy this one. I think you'll also enjoy Jesus Feminist by Sarah Bessey. She has a new book coming out next year that I'm really excited to read, and this one was also very good. Then there is Pray Tell, Why We Silence Women Who Tell the Truth and How Everyone Can Speak Up by Tiffany Bloom. This book offers a good look into how churches perpetuate abuse of women and then cover it up, and how that plays into the culture that oppresses and abuses women. It's a very difficult book to read in places, but it's very good and it's well cited. Then there are a couple books that are a little more niche-y, but that I found so good. The first is The Lost Apostle by Rena Peterson. Its subtitle is Searching for the Truth About Junia, who is a female apostle that has really been covered up and hidden throughout history. In some translations, her name was changed to a man's name that didn't actually, it wasn't a name that was used as a man's name then. And it doesn't just talk about Junia, it talks about women throughout church history on a broader scale, but I just found this book so interesting and I really loved it. So it's another one that I would really recommend. This was my favorite read of 2022. And then the last one is Priscilla's Letter, Finding the Author of the Epistle to the Hebrews by Ruth Hoppen. This I thought was really interesting in that she's not so much saying that Priscilla was the author of Hebrews, but she explores all the different people that scholars have thought could have been the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, and then lays out a case for why each of them probably weren't or couldn't have been, and then points out some of the things within the book of Hebrews that kind of act as clues that maybe a woman could have written it, and then she explores who could possibly have written it, and Priscilla is one of the people that could logically have written it. And she's not making any grand claims, but it is an interesting and thought-provoking book that will make you think, and I liked that she lays out a pretty good, well-researched, well-cited case for possible female authorship of the biblical canon book of Hebrews. Anyway, those are some of the books that I have found interesting or helpful as I have been walking this path myself. I hope that maybe some of them could be helpful for you if you're on a similar journey or if you're just curious about some of these topics. If there are any that you've really enjoyed and you'd like to share them with me, please feel free to leave a comment below. If you are someone who comes from a more conservative perspective and you're feeling the need as you watch this video to tell me why you think these books are wrong or why you think I should come over to your side of the fence on things, please just take a moment to reflect on the defensiveness that is bringing up in you, and maybe choose not to comment, or to, if you feel you need to comment from a place of kindness and love as Jesus teaches you to do, instead of coming at me from more of an apologist perspective, because conversations that come from that place will not be very fruitful. And I want my comment section to remain a safe space, so I have no problem deleting comments and preventing you from leaving comments on my other videos if you choose to take a more unkind approach to your comments. Anyway, if you're still here, thanks for being here. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.